up
Okay, so
top.
I wonder why I'm not getting that from my end. So hopefully I can download it from here. If I can't, you might have to stop and send it to me. But
Well,
we'll
yeah, I
it's
could,
recording from this end as well. So
yeah, I imagine I have to use Dropbox, but I could do that.
all right, here we go. Welcome all to my paranormal closet where the stories and magic take place.
Woo!
Today's guest is a former principal of the Martin Agency. Over the years, the firm has created well-known advertising for such clients as Geico, Virginia Tourism, Virginia is for lovers, Mercedes-Benz, UPS, Colonial Williamsburg, and King's Dominion, among others. Today, he's the editor and publisher of the Oaklea Press. Did I say that correctly?
It's Oakley Press,
Oh,
the Lee
Oakley
beside
Press.
the oak, Oakley.
A traditional book publisher. He's also the author of more than 36 books, including 6 business titles under his own name and 5 novels. Listed in Who's Who in America, he's the only 3-time winner of the Writer's Digest Book Award, having won twice for fiction and once for nonfiction. He has also won first prize for visionary fiction from Independent Publisher Magazine, first prize for nonfiction from USA Book News, and a bronze medal for visionary fiction from Reader's Favorite Book Reviews. Writing is Steve's passion. Join me in welcoming Stephen Hawley Martin.
Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. I'm so happy to be here and looking
I'm
forward
thrilled
to
to,
it.
I'm thrilled to have you back on the show for the second time. Now to introduce the public to your new release, How You Can Help Create the Shift in Consciousness Needed to Save the World. That's some long title you got there. I thought I had a long title for my book. It's really long. A shift in consciousness is a shift in perspective as we change our beliefs about life, the life we see and experience then changes accordingly. People have been predicting this shift in a direction of peace, love, harmony, and understanding among the people of our planet for quite some time now. Globally, this shift has already started, and as I understand it, you are all for it.
I am all for it. I think that once people reach this level of higher consciousness, understand what life is really all about, why they're here on earth, that they are eternal spiritual beings that are having a temporary physical experience. When people realize that, it's going to make the world a much better place because, we're all part of it and we're all one in a way. And so maybe we'll start being nice to each other for a change.
That would be nice. Sometimes I find it hard to believe because there are constantly those who are trying to divide us. Media being the number one culprit, in my opinion. But you've teamed up with a television production company called Good All Over TV to produce a series for public television where you intend to get the facts out about the true nature of reality. How did this all come about?
Well, I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Bell Tower Pictures, and Bell Tower Pictures is in business to make uplifting films, and they've made a number for PBS, and they've also made some that were released in movie theaters that were regular movies, not just documentaries. And the president of that is a guy named Craig Martin, no relation, who is a partner in a film production company, Good All Over TV, that makes films for PBS. So he and I got to be friends through that. And he is very interested in AI, automated intelligence, and I'm, of course, a metaphysician, been studying reality and trying to figure it all out for 50 years. And he was the son of a missionary who he grew up in Thailand, but he's not strictly a Christian anymore. He's a man of faith, but his faith is more spiritual,
Right.
religious. And he got very interested in this. We started talking and decided this would be a great thing. We can do a series. He can get information out about his AI interests, and I can get the facts out about the true nature of reality, which is what I've been trying to do with my books now for about 25 years. So that's how it all came about, Eleanor.
When do you hope for it to air?
We're hoping that it'll be this fall. We're working on it. We've had a number of meetings. We're trying to work out the format and how we're, exactly the logistics of the whole thing. We're also in the process of raising some money to fund it, which anybody wants to help with that, we'd be delighted.
Have you set up a GoFundMe page for that?
You can go to my website, shmartin.com, and there is a button there that says donate. You can use that. We may do the GoFundMe. We haven't decided yet. We're looking for donors that are interested in these topics and want to get the public to learn about them.
Interest, yeah. So what kind of episodes are you going to have?
Well, I think probably we'll start out with Craig and me in a conversation, but I see us moving to conversations with other experts. For example, there's a unit of the University of Virginia Medical School, which is not far from me. I'm in Richmond. We're both in Richmond, Virginia. Up in Charlottesville, about 50, 60 miles away, is the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and they have a division called the Division of Perceptual Studies that has been studying consciousness for about 60 years. They started in the mid 1960s. They study children's memories of past lives. They have over 2,500 cases that they've studied. They've solved about 1,700 of them where they found the individual that the child said he was in a previous life based on.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah, it's amazing because and they're also studying near-death experiences. The first book about that, Life After Life by Raymond Moody, was while he was at the University of Virginia in the medical school there. They're studying all kinds of things about consciousness, and basically what they've determined is that the brain does not create consciousness. It is more like a receiver of consciousness. It certainly affects your consciousness. When you have too much to drink or take drugs or whatever, things are very different, but it's not where consciousness comes from. Consciousness is basically the ground of being, of reality, and it's something we all share. We think we're separate because we have an ego, we have a subconscious mind that's been built up over many incarnations. But anyway, for example, then there are several experts there who have been studying reincarnation, who've been studying past lives, who've been studying psychic phenomena, and they would be people that we would want to have in this show and interview and let them tell about what they've learned.
That would certainly be something that I'd be interested in for sure.
Yeah.
When this may be out of the scope of what you're talking about with consciousness, and you tell me if it is, but because I just finished reading this book called Second Sight by David Williams. It actually came out in the 70s, and there was a movie based on his book with Lindsay Wagner in it. It was called The Other Lives of Jenny Logan. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was one of my all-time favorites as a young girl. And I said, I want to see if there's the book that matches the movie, because I saw the movie before I read the book. I actually found it online, and I said, I've got to get it, and I've got to read it and compare it to the movie. You know how you do that? You usually read the book and then you see the movie, and then you're usually upset because they've ruined the whole story like they did with Stephen King's The Shining, right?
Yeah.
So I read the book, and I was just really happy with the way they did it, because they presented it just as it should be. And it's a book that has to do with time travel and how this woman is able to bring herself back into this time frame that she wanted to be in. And Somewhere in Time is with Christopher Reeve is pretty similar to that too, that he's able to bring himself back to a time. Do you think that's a reality? Is it just fantasy, or are there other dimensions? Can people time travel? What's your thoughts on that? I'm really curious.
Yeah. I haven't read the book you're talking about, but I did read Somewhere in Time a while ago. What I'll say about that is that time only exists in this reality, this 3D. Actually, I call it a 4D reality because it's height, depth, width, and time. When you go beyond this reality into the dimensions of mind, I call them, of consciousness, there is no time. It's all one time. And the reason I am pretty sure about that is that these remote viewers, and I've interviewed 2 remote viewers that are very adept at it. One is Stefan Schwartz, who does this to find and locate archaeological digs and things like that. The other is a guy named Skip Atwater. He was the gentleman who set up Stargate for the Army back in the 70s and 80s to spy on the Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet Union using psychics, and which was very effective apparently. But anyway, what they tell me is that you can, when you go into the dimension beyond this dimension, it's all one time. And they can, if you want to go back in time or to the future, you can do it, but that's the way you have to do it, through the mind. For example, they can view through their technique something that happened in the past, and they can view through their techniques the probable future. And I'll give you a quick example of that if I can. Stephen Schwartz was teaching a class at Atlantic University down in Virginia Beach about teaching his students how to do this remote viewing. And he had 47 students. This particular story took place in 2003 during the Iraq War, when before Saddam Hussein had been captured. So at the end of the session, end of the class, after the last few days, he had his students remote view the capture of Saddam Hussein, which had not yet taken place. And he took the 47 answers that he got and compared them, and took the ones that seemed to agree, and made a list. And it's a list of, about 10 or 15 observations, and every one of them was right on.
Wow.
Captured, how he was captured, what he was wearing, the fact that he had a pistol with him, the fact that he had a lot of money with him, $750,000 in cash, all of that checked out. And so, I mean, that's a case of traveling to the probable future. It was only 6 weeks between the time that was done and when it happened. So, things can change. We do have free will, but as long as they keep going the way they're going, that's what the future is going to be, unless something happens. And what I'm trying to do with my TV show and books is get the information out that will shift people's consciousness, so we'll all start getting along a whole lot better.
How does one shift their state of consciousness?
Well, by knowing and reviewing the facts of what, you're taught in school. We're all taught in school the scientific materialist viewpoint, a doctrine, I would say, that came about in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century. One of the books I've written, one of my ancestors was one of the Salem witches, and I've written a book about her.
Yes, love that book.
Yeah, it's called A Witch in the Family. You can go to my website and find it in my list of books and click on it.
So interesting. So interesting.
Yeah, it is. Well, and I've written that book from the standpoint of my understanding now of the true nature of reality, that when most books are written like, about the witch trials, they assume there's no such thing as the paranormal because that's the scientific position that's been ever since Darwin, actually before Darwin. Let me quickly explain that. A English philosopher named Thomas Hobbes, who's fairly famous and wrote the Leviathan, I think is his famous book. It's about politics, but he said in, I think, 16 something, it was around the witch trials, that uh, if God made it, then that's all that exists. In other words, our physical reality is all that exists. Now, intellectuals picked up on that. People like Thomas Jefferson and our founding fathers, many of them believed, they became what's called deists. Just the clockmaker theory, the idea that God created it all, wound it up, and let it go, and it's no longer involved, and that the physical realm is all that exists because that God made it, and let it go. Well, along comes Darwin in the mid-19th century, 1859, I believe, is when he published that book, Origin of Species. And intellectuals were able to get rid of God altogether. So, based on Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest and how organisms came about. Well, that is still taught in school, even though there's the quantum mechanics came along in the early 20th century. Max Planck created quantum theory and actually won the Nobel Prize for it. And Max Planck said clearly, the ground of reality, we cannot get past consciousness. Consciousness is the, in so many words, ground of reality from which everything comes. It's not that matter, the brain, creates consciousness, it's that consciousness creates matter. Well, he's been saying that, and other quantum physicists, Einstein's basic theory was that E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Well, what all that means is there's really no such thing as matter the way those 19th and 18th century people perceived it. It's all energy, and it's energy that's conscious. Max Planck also said that there's an intelligent mind behind it all. Yet we're taught today in school that everything came from a big bang, which started with nothing. So from nothing, which doesn't exist, came all the laws of the universe, all the matter and energy of the universe. I mean, it's ridiculous. You need to listen to what the founder of quantum physics said, Max Planck. There is an intelligent mind, consciousness behind it all. Now they definitely have a theory that the field is the ground of reality, the unified field, and that is basically what Max Planck was talking about. But still, we're taught in school that all that exists is matter. So if you buy into that, when you die, that's it. It's like we pulled the plug on a vacuum cleaner.
It's a shame. It's a shame. They're being taught whatever is being selected to teach them, and then they come out only knowing this and have no perspective on the reality, which is a shame.
Well, it is. And, thousands of people have had, and I think I read somewhere that something like 14% of the public has had a near-death experience. I had one when I was 25, and that's what really started me on all this. But when they have this, most people who have the near-death experience a life review. Now, you're not judged. There's no God with a long white beard who's standing there and pointing his finger at you for mistakes you made or things you shouldn't have done. But you see what effect you had on others, both good and bad.
Your lessons.
Yeah, based on your actions and your thoughts. And as I said, nobody judges you and you don't go to hell because of it. But if people knew that they were going to have that life review, it might change their, what they do a little bit,
From people that I've interviewed from near-death experiences, it's changed them forever.
Right.
They really learned something from it and came back a totally different person. Do you mind sharing with us what happened to you when you were 25 and how that went?
Yeah, that was a very brief out-of-body experience, but it was enough to wake me up. What happened is I had a terrible case of the flu. I was a bachelor living in Baltimore, worked at an ad agency, and I had two roommates, both bachelors, who were, we were having a good time living there in a old townhouse in Bolton Hill in Baltimore. And I was up in my bedroom on a Saturday night with terrible case of the flu, felt awful. And I heard people come in downstairs and, sort of chatter starting. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a party going on down there. And so I decided at the age of 25, well, I get up, I'll be all right. And I went down and I had some drinks and things, and I just started feeling horrible. I managed to make it back up the stairs, flopped down in the bed, and the next thing I knew, I was looking down at my body.
Oh, wow.
And it looked like roadkill down there. And I was looking around, I saw the ceiling, and I was looking at the little cracks in the ceiling, and I thought, I don't feel bad anymore. I feel pretty good. And wait a minute, that's my body down there, and I'm up here. Revelation, I'm not my body, I'm my consciousness. So that didn't last very long. It didn't go through the tunnel. I didn't have a life review. It's really was very brief, but I woke up the next morning. I was, not okay, but I was better than I was when I was flopped out on the bed. But anyway, that started me on. I grew up in that situation we'll be talking about where I was in my family, we're secular, materialist type people. I mean, we went to church on Christmas or Easter, but I was not brought up in a religious family. And I learned in school, as everybody else did and still does, that matter is all that exists. And, the brain creates consciousness. And when you're dead, you're dead, and that's it. And so I realized from that experience, that's not right. Something's different. First thing I did was join the Rosicrucian order, which is a society of mystics who study metaphysical laws. And I went through all their courses and went from novice to adept. And I read everything I could about metaphysics. When Raymond Moody's book came out, Life After Life, I read it in one sitting. And I've studied this it's been 50 years. I've had what back then was called a internet talk show called The Truth About Life for about 3 years, interviewed over 100 authorities on things like quantum mechanics and paranormal research, near-death survivors, et cetera, over 100 individuals. And that's where a lot of the material in my book comes from. I interviewed a couple of people from the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Jim B. Tucker, for example, who's head of that, who's written 2 books on children's memories of past lives. And so, that's a long answer to your question, but it was a very short out-of-body experience, but it woke me up.
Do you feel like we constantly go into a new past life regression? I've had that myself because I was curious because I felt like I had past lives. The question I want to ask is, do you think that we keep on moving into different lives to learn different lessons, or do we actually go somewhere? Is there a place for us to go to? I know that I totally don't believe that there's nothing. I don't believe that it ends when we die, that's for sure. But where do you feel that we actually go? Do we move on to another life? Do we have choices to make? Can we go or not go?
Yeah, I believe that when we die, when our body dies, we don't die, but when our body dies, we go into another realm of mind. I think of it as mind, so you could call it a spiritual realm if you want. And that Jesus said, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. And so I think he was talking about the fact that there are a lot of places you go. I think you go where you feel comfortable, and that you probably have a group of souls that are your soulmates who are evolving with you. And this is certainly not my idea. It's one that I've heard from a number of people who are into all this, that you incarnate not every time, but often with different souls from that group that you're part of. You might, in one life, they might be your father or your mother or your sister, or your brother, but it switches around. And that the whole purpose of life is evolution. If you look around at the world, you can see that everything is evolving. All the life is evolving. That's what it does. I wrote a book called The Secret of Life, and spoiler alert, the secret of life is the urge to become. We all have the urge to become more than we are. And that is what we're doing each time we incarnate. Now, I believe also that we have some choices to make when we decide that we're going to go back to the physical realm, and it's usually to either complete some sort of mission. We have something that we want to get done, or there are things that we need to learn to improve ourselves, for our soul to evolve. And we're setting ourselves up to have the lessons and the problems and things that we have to overcome during our lifetime in order for us to learn that and for it to become part of us. We go through a veil of forgetting when we enter this reality, because if we knew all that we knew before we incarnated and what we were trying to do and so on and so forth, that it would be like cheating. It'd be like having the answers to the test before you sat down to take it. And so it wouldn't be something that you internalize. You have to go through these struggles and face difficulties and overcome them in order to internalize it and to grow. Now, it doesn't mean that we're always successful in every life in accomplishing what we set out to do or learn. In fact, it is possible to regress, to go backwards. But I think that's what it's about. I think we're on a path toward reunification with the source, and we've got a long, long, long way to go before we get there. I can tell you a quick story about regressing, if you let me do it. Your listeners probably know about Edgar Casey, who was back in the 20th century known as the sleeping prophet. He was a psychic who went into a self-induced trance twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and answered people's questions, mostly had to do with health issues that they were suffering. He's also known as the father of herbal medicine, or, that kind of natural medicine. He was born in 1877 and died in 1945. But Edgar Casey did a past life review of himself. He studied his own past life. And apparently in the previous life, he had regressed. He had been way back a priest in Egypt, and had attained a very high level of spirituality and psychic ability. And when he used it in his current life between 1877 and 1945, he had to go into a trance to do it. Prior to that, he did not have to go into a trance, and he misused that ability to enrich himself. He was a riverboat gambler. He seduced women. He was a real rogue, using psychic abilities in a way that apparently he shouldn't. And so that was why he said that he had to go into a trance in the current life in order to access that ability. So there you go, Ellery.
Did he know how he died in the previous life?
He probably did, but I don't
remember
that part. I have been down to, there's a place in Virginia Beach, which is not far from me. It's a couple-hour drive, called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And that is the nonprofit that Edgar Casey established during his time back in the 1930s. And it's still there, still going strong. It's right at the corner of 68th and Atlantic Avenue, big building. And it houses all his readings. They were all taken down by a stenographer and typed up, and they're now available. I believe you can get a CD with all of them on it, 14,000 readings. But I've interviewed people who work there, including Kevin Tatesky, who's the executive director of the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And that's really from him and from a guy named Peter Woodbury. And also I interviewed in 2007, I think it was, Edgar Casey's son, who at the time was 95 years old, whose name was Edgar Evans Casey. He was still very sharp. But anyway, that's how I know most of these anecdotes about Edgar Casey. I've read books about him. There's a wonderful book on reincarnation called Many Mansions by a woman. I can't think of her name right now, but it explains all this thing about evolution and why we come back and how we can be affected by something that happened in a past life can be still troubling us now. You know, maybe we drowned in a past life, and so we're, you know, afraid of water.
Afraid of water. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's very interesting. So there are 4 modes of consciousness, correct?
4 modes of, well, you have. I'm not sure what you're asking there. There's the ego, superego, and id.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the adult, in the modern parlance, it's adult, parent, and child. And that was a book that was, gosh, it's probably written in the 70s, which I read. It's a great book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And basically, it's how we interact with one another. And most people go around thinking that others are okay and they're not okay, and so they have to win approval from others, and so they're operating out of their child, whereas others walk around, you know, thinking they know it all and want to tell people what to do. They're operating from their adult, and the way to have a happy life is to stay not your adult, your parent. They're operating from the parent. The way to have a happy life is to stay in your adult, which is the rational reasoning part of you that you know, can consider all kinds of things without getting upset about it. And when you're triggered by something happening and you want to react, you need to step back and say, I'm not going to react. Now, why did I feel that way when so-and-so said that, or when such and such happened? And kind of analyze yourself and bring whatever it is to the surface that you learned as a child or from a past life, wherever it comes from, that made you feel that way. And that's the way to get, to improve yourself, I guess. Eleanor, what do you think about all that?
Very confusing to me. I don't have a metaphysical mind like you do. For me, it has to be in very simple terms. That's the way my brain works. And I find it very confusing. I don't know if I would be able to even tell if I've reached a higher consciousness, to be honest with you. I would love to have an out-of-body experience like you did. In fact, I think I've had dreams in the past, which people say weren't actually dreams. I may refer to it as a dream, but people that I've interviewed have said to me, no, you actually had an out-of-body experience, because what had happened was I didn't feel myself going through the roof, but I was already above my house, and I was in the sky, and I could see the stars around me, and I could feel the wind blowing in my ear, my hair, and I knew I was out of my body. Is that a different consciousness?
Yeah, well, that's what you had there. Most people would call that a lucid dream, but you were out of your body. I mean, this reminds me of, I think I mentioned Skip Atwater, who was the guy who started the Stargate unit of the Army intelligence that spied on Russians with psychics.
That's so interesting.
He, as a child, I interviewed him, and he, as a child, would go out of his body at night all the time, and sometimes he would think he was going to the bathroom, but he would wet his bed.
Oh.
Out of his body. I mean, his consciousness was out of his body, but the rest of him was still in bed. The body. And so his mother apparently was into all this sort of thing and explained to him why that happened, that he was really he'd left his body, but he left his body. He needed to take his body with him when he went to the bathroom. So yeah, especially children, I think, have that experience pretty
They're
frequently.
very receptive. Yeah, they're very receptive children. And when they reach a certain age, well, that's what they even say with past lives, children up to, I think it's the age 5 or 6, can remember things clearly. And then as they grow older, it tends to, they lose that memory, as you said earlier, because if we knew about everything that we learned in a previous life, it would be like cheating on a test. So that's probably the reason for these children forgetting as they get older. But I do appreciate the fact that that man's mother, who was into that sort of thing, was able to nurture him in that experience so that he would understand what was happening to him, because a lot of children don't grow up with that kind of support. And some of it's intentional because they think that they're crazy, don't tell the world because they're going to put you away, that sort of thing. Others are just ignorance, they don't understand it or know it, and they say it was a dream, it's not anything. But those people who actually understand and support this sort of thing and recognize it in their children, and then are able to nurture it and help them grow it. I work with people in the field that are so experienced and so learned, and I'm learning from them because they had parents that helped them in their journey when they were younger to learn and understand their gifts and use them for the betterment of paranormal world.
Well, yes, and that's absolutely true. And the thing of it is, we've all been taught in school that it's impossible to leave our bodies and go out into, for any of this sort of stuff we've been talking about to happen. And so by the time we're told that enough times, we believe it. And that's one of the reasons I want to get this information out through my books and through hopefully this TV show that we're doing, so that people will understand what is true and real and what the true nature of reality is, and that we are these spiritual beings who we're not meat robots, which is what we're taught in school. We're taught that we're like a robot made of meat with a brain it's like a computer that creates our consciousness, and that's not at all the truth. So there you go.
I understand that anxiety has a way of working its way into the mix of these shifts. Have you heard anything like that before?
Well,
The
yeah, I think we're going through a time that's very chaotic, and I think whenever you have a shift, that's what happens. There's chaos for a while, and that's the stage I believe that we're in. We're in the chaotic stage where we've got political parties that can't compromise anymore. We're either all one way or all the other way, and it's a mess. The world is kind of a mess. We got wars going on, two big wars. Iran. Who knows what's going to happen with that? China and Taiwan. I mean, this is about as since World War II. I can't remember it being any worse. And so, yeah, we're going through chaos, but I think we're going to come out on the other side. I'm optimistic that we will have the shift that'll go in the right way. The other thing is AI, artificial intelligence. How's that going to affect the world? It can only draw upon stuff that's already in the system, and so much of it is false because it's based on scientific materialism, on physicalism, which is an incorrect doctrine that's based on a false premise, the premise being that only matter exists, and it's not true.
I wonder if we'll ever change the minds of people.
You know,
You can only hope and try, but
I
don't
heard a quote recently, Eleanor, that Carl Jung, who theorized that there's a universal consciousness that we're all part of, which is the same idea. But Carl Jung said, progress is made one funeral at a time. So the old guys that are holding on to this old-fashioned scientific materialism for the 19th century, they got to die off before we.
It's so funny that you should say that, because I don't know if you know, but I'm a paranormal investigator. I do investigations in old people's residences and businesses, and I write about them in my books. And I'm really into historical preservation and trying to preserve these older buildings that get torn down to build enormous apartments. And I like to approach the historical societies in the areas that I write about to try and help them, because most of them are nonprofit and they're trying to raise funds to keep these buildings up and preserved. And I try to use the paranormal because that's what I do. I tell them, look, we can have a fundraising event where we have a paranormal investigation in the building, and the funds that come in will help you to preserve the building. And there are so many older people there that are unbending. And oh no, we don't believe in ghosts. We don't believe in the paranormal. And I'm thinking, think outside of the box. You may not believe it, but there are so many people that do. And why don't you just be, optimistic about it and say, okay, well, let's let this happen. Even though I don't believe in it, it's going to bring in money to help us keep this beautiful building in the form that we want it to be. But no, they're not. And that thought has been in my mind constantly, that we just have to wait for these people to die, unfortunately, for things to actually happen where they're allowed. So you do have groups that are like, yeah, let's do it. And they're the ones that are benefiting from it, while these other ones are just sitting back waiting for the money to roll in, and it's not going to happen because they're not looking outside the box.
Plus, when they die, when that person who doesn't believe in ghosts dies, they may not know they're dead. And they may be the one that ends up haunting that building. I have a question, but let me just quickly tell you a story that popped into my mind because of what you said. And that is, my first wife was French. We used to go to France every summer. I'd go for 2 or 3 weeks. She'd stay the whole summer.
You've told me this story. I love this story. Go ahead, tell us again.
Okay. So anyway, her good friend Catherine married Henri, who was a count, and they lived in Paris, but he inherited this house. It's really, they called it a chateau, but it's a big house in Lorraine. And we went to visit there one time, and Henri knew I was interested in this sort of thing. So he told me the story about when they were renovating the house. He would, at night, when he was drifting off to sleep, he would hear what sounded like someone screaming for help. Or if he woke up in the middle of the night, and he was kind of half asleep, he'd hear it again. After a while, he had all these workmen around who were renovating the house. After a while, he went down into the cellar, and he saw this wall that looked like it might be newer than the other ones. And he got the workmen to tear down that wall, and behind the wall was a skeleton. And Henri said, apparently, they bopped this guy in the head, bricked him up behind the wall, and he must have come to, and he was trying to get out. Anyway, they gave him a Christian burial, and they never heard the night noises again. So, there was somebody who died who didn't realize they were dead, and been trying to get out ever since. And because there is no time in the other dimension, he didn't realize it had probably been 50, 60, 70 years since he'd been behind there.
Did they ever find out who he was? Who that person? No.
He thinks it probably happened before World War II, because the house hadn't been lived in quite some time. So anyway, yeah, I think that often people die and they don't realize. There's a Twilight Zone episode that I saw many years ago, where this woman's in an automobile accident, but she keeps on going. And then, of course, at the end, again, spoiler report, she's dead and doesn't know it. She just keeps on doing what she's doing. So
my daughter and I were just talking about the Bruce Willis movie Sixth Sense just yesterday. Spoiler alert out there. You find out at the end that he's actually dead. But that movie, when that first came out, I remember just floored me at the end, because you had no idea throughout this whole meeting. You really just thought that he was a psychologist helping this young child, which he was, but you didn't realize that the child who sees ghosts was really seeing a ghost. It was just a great, great movie, but that's similar to, and I love movies that are like this. There's another one, The Others, with Nicole Kidman, that's very similar in nature to that as well.
Yeah.
But I love those kind of those kind of movies with endings like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But apparently can't happen. So my advice to anybody is, eventually we're all gonna, pass. So when you do, look for the light and go for it.
Exactly, especially since you mentioned that some people don't know that they've died. It happens a lot with sudden tragic deaths or
Yeah.
like accidents that happened and they don't even realize it. And as a paranormal investigator, our testimonial is that our first and foremost thing of importance is the spirit and helping that spirit get acknowledged and telling the world what it is that they want to say. And if we are able to help that spirit move on, we try to do that. Sometimes they don't want to go, and then we have to try and help the residences in that building to live in harmony with this spirit, because we are actually in that spirit space. They were there before we were. But most of the time we were able to help them move on, which is a great thing. You know
Well,
what I
let me
mean?
ask you this. You've got an old building with a spirit living there. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
And
residing.
when they tear the building down and put up the apartment building, does the spirit
They're still there.
they
They're still there.
in the old building?
Yeah. Yeah, they're still in the old building. In their mindset, they are. So even though it's changed into an apartment building and it might be somebody's bathroom that was maybe part of their bedroom at one time, they are still there haunting it. So you do end up having. I actually wrote about something similar to that years ago. Um, there was a beautiful old house on a property, and it was haunted, and the people that lived there, the elderly woman that lived there, she rented a portion of it to a young woman, and so they were experiencing all this stuff. And then when the woman died and the house was sold by her children, it was torn down and an apartment building was put up. And then the people in the apartment building were experiencing what they had experienced, and now the woman who owned the home was part of the haunting. She was haunting the apartment building.
My.
Which
Yeah,
and
I'm not surprised that that's the way it works. Yeah,
yeah.
because we build this world around us with our minds, both when we're in the physical form still here alive, as well as when we're on the other side.
I did an investigation a couple of years ago in an old diner. It actually gives you the appearance of an old 50s diner. You know how they had them looking that way back then? And it still is that way. And they were having experiences in the building. So we did an investigation, and I had mediums with me who could actually physically see, because sometimes anybody can see them if they're powerful enough to let you do that. But then if not, the mediums are able to see. And one of them was seeing a man, half of his body, just the upper portion of his body, and he looked to be like a chef, where he had like that kind of chef hat on. And so when we asked the owner of the building, they said, well, that makes sense because the floor used to be lower and we've now heightened it. So the only reason why you're seeing half of him is probably because he was on the original floor plan, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Very interesting. Wow. Okay.
Well, this is really fun. I'm so thankful for you coming back on and reaching out to me. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Eleanor. I'm so glad you invited me, and I really appreciate your time. And just want to tell everybody, visit my website, shmartin.com, shmartin.com, and
Are you able
find
to
out
get
more.
your books there too? Are your books available there or on Amazon?
Well, my books are there. There are some that are on the home page. You can actually download the new book for free from the home page, a PDF of it. But if you look up in the menu, you'll see fiction and nonfiction books. Click on that, and most of my books are on that page. If you click on a cover, you can find out more about it. It'll take you to the page on Amazon where there'll be reviews and you can read the first few chapters and so forth. So yes, you can do all that through my website, shmartin.com.
Great. So listeners out there, you hear free. Free. The new book is free. Everybody likes free. So if you really want to learn more about this sort of thing, check it out. If you all like listening to this week's episode and you're into all things paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Creepin' It Real podcast, out of the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. If you missed any episode, you can still watch it and listen to it directly on my Eleanor Wagner YouTube channel. I'm going to let you know that if you are interested in reading any of my books, you can find them on Amazon, but you can get signed copies directly through me at authoreleanorwagner@gmail.com. I write about the history of the town and the location. I add the paranormal story to the mix, and I finish it all off with photos and evidence. I hope you will stay a while and listen as Silent Crafters Stranger Part 2 takes us out of the show. Thank you. And I think you need to stop on your end.